The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Westmont Palace as 9-year-old Princess Isabella hurried down the grand corridor toward the breakfast room. Her small feet made soft padding sounds against the polished stone, and her golden curls bounced with each quick step. She was already running late for the family breakfast, something that Queen Regent Victoria absolutely despised. Isabella paused outside the heavy oak doors, smoothing down her navy blue dress and taking a deep breath. Through the crack beneath the door, she could hear voices inside. Her father, Prince Alexander's calm, measured tone, and then another voice that made her stomach tighten with nervousness. Queen Regent Victoria, her stepmother, was speaking in that sharp way that always made Isabella feel like she had done something wrong, even when she hadn't. The young princess pressed her ear closer to the door, not meaning to eavesdrop but unable to help herself. Victoria was talking about the upcoming Royal Children's Charity Gala, an event where Isabella was supposed to give her first official speech to a room full of important people from around the kingdom. The child is simply not ready. Alexander? Victoria's voice carried clearly through the door. She stumbles over simple words, fidgets constantly, and yesterday during practice she actually forgot the entire middle section of her speech. It's embarrassing for the crown. Isabella's cheeks burned with shame. She had been practicing that speech for weeks, staying up late in her room, reading it over and over until the words blurred together on the page. Her governess, Miss Adelaide, had told her she was improving every day, but clearly that wasn't good enough for Victoria. "She's only 9 years old," Prince Alexander replied, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. "She needs encouragement, not criticism. These public appearances are new to her." 9 years old and already showing signs of weakness, Victoria snapped back. "When I was her age, I was already representing my family at state functions without a single mistake. The people expect excellence from their royal family, not childish stammering and nervous giggling." Isabella's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. She wanted to run back to her room, to hide under her covers and pretend this conversation never happened. But she knew she had to face breakfast eventually. The royal schedule waited for no one, not even a scared little princess. "The speech needs to be simplified," Victoria continued, her tone becoming more commanding. "And if she cannot handle even that, perhaps Princess Isabella should step back from public duties until she matures enough to represent the crown properly." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Step back from public duties? But those appearances were the only times she felt truly important, truly like a real princess. When she visited the children's hospitals or attended the charity events, she could see how much her presence meant to people. The way the sick children's faces lit up when she walked into their rooms, how the charity workers thanked her for bringing attention to their causes. Those moments made all the preparation and nervousness worthwhile. Prince Alexander's chair scraped against the floor, and Isabella could picture him standing up, the way he did when he was about to make an important point. "Victoria, I understand your concerns about the family's image, but Isabella is doing her best. She's a bright, caring child who connects with people in a way that cannot be taught. That genuine warmth is worth more than perfect elocution." "Warmth doesn't command respect," Victoria shot back. "The monarchy survives on dignity, protocol, and flawless execution. One mistake in front of the wrong audience, one moment of childish behavior caught by the cameras, and the damage to our reputation could take years to repair." Isabella felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never thought of her nervousness as damaging to the family. She just wanted to do well to make her father proud, to honor her late mother's memory by being the kind of princess the kingdom could love and respect. The breakfast room fell silent for a moment, and Isabella wondered if they had finished their conversation. But then Victoria spoke again, her voice lower but no less intense. "I'm not suggesting this to be cruel, Alexander. I genuinely care about Isabella's future and the future of this monarchy. But she needs to understand that being a princess isn't just about wearing pretty dresses and waving at crowds. It's about responsibility, about setting an example, about being strong enough to carry the weight of a nation's expectations." Isabella wiped her eyes quickly and straightened her shoulders. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough yet. But she was determined to prove that she could be. She would practice her speech until it was perfect, stand straighter, speak clearer, and show everyone that she could be the princess they needed her to be. Taking one final deep breath, Princess Isabella pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the breakfast room. ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. Unaware that this morning's conversation would set in motion events that would test not just her own strength, but the very bonds that held their royal family together. The breakfast room felt unusually tense as Princess Isabella entered, her small frame silhouetted against the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Prince Alexander looked up from his newspaper with a warm smile, but Isabella could see the concern lingering in his eyes. Queen Regent Victoria sat rigidly at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, her posture perfect as always, cutting her toast into precise, equal squares. "Good morning, sweetheart," Prince Alexander said, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. "Come sit next to me." Isabella walked carefully to her chair, acutely aware of Victoria's watchful gaze following her every movement. She tried to remember all the etiquette lessons, shoulders back, head high, graceful steps, but under the scrutiny, everything felt forced and unnatural. "You're 7 minutes late," Victoria observed without looking up from her breakfast. Punctuality is a virtue that reflects respect for others and discipline in oneself. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Isabella replied quietly, using Victoria's formal title as she had been taught. "I was reviewing my speech for the charity gala." Victoria's knife paused mid-cut. "Oh yes, the speech." She finally looked up, her gray eyes studying Isabella with an expression that made the young princess feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Perhaps it would be beneficial to discuss some modifications to your presentation." Prince Alexander reached for the coffee pot, his movements deliberate and calm, but Isabella noticed the slight tension in his jaw. "Isabella has been working very hard on her speech. Miss Adelaide says she's made remarkable progress." "Miss Adelaide is paid to be encouraging," Victoria replied smoothly. "However, encouragement without honest assessment does the child no favors." She turned her attention fully to Isabella. "Tell me, dear, how do you feel about addressing nearly 500 distinguished guests?" Isabella's spoon trembled slightly as she stirred honey into her porridge. The number sounded enormous when stated so bluntly. She had known there would be many people, but somehow 500 felt like an insurmountable mountain of eyes all focused on her. "I'm nervous," Isabella admitted honestly. "But I'm excited too. The charity helps children who don't have homes, and I want to help them find families." "Nervousness is natural," Victoria conceded, "but it must be controlled, channeled into focus rather than allowed to manifest as fidgeting or stumbling over words." She dabbed her lips with her napkin. "The audience will include foreign dignitaries, members of parliament, and several prominent journalists. Any misstep will be magnified and analyzed." Isabella felt her appetite disappearing, but she forced herself to take another spoonful of porridge. Her father had always told her that queens must eat properly to maintain their strength, even when their stomachs were twisted with worry. "What kind of modifications were you thinking about?" Prince Alexander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Victoria smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Simply some adjustments to make the content more appropriate for Isabella's current skill level. Perhaps shorter sentences, simpler vocabulary, maybe even having her read from cards rather than memorizing the entire piece." "But I've already memorized it," Isabella protested softly, "and Miss Adelaide says memorizing shows more respect for the audience than reading from cards. Miss Adelaide has never addressed a room full of people who could influence the kingdom's future with a single, unfavorable article," Victoria replied. "This isn't a school recital, Isabella. This is statecraft." The word statecraft hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella had heard it before in her history lessons. The art of conducting affairs of state, the delicate balance of diplomacy and public image that kept kingdoms strong and stable. It sounded so important, so grown up, and suddenly Isabella felt very small indeed. "I could practice more," Isabella offered hopefully. "I could rehearse in front of mirrors, or maybe some of the palace staff could listen and give me feedback." Victoria's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Isabella thought she saw a glimmer of approval. "Practice is admirable, child, but there are some lessons that can only be learned through experience. Perhaps it would be wiser to begin with smaller venues, less critical audiences." "The children's hospital visit next month," Prince Alexander suggested quickly. "That would be perfect practice for Isabella. Smaller group, more relaxed atmosphere." "Exactly what I was thinking," Victoria agreed. "And for the charity gala, we could arrange for someone else to deliver the main address." Perhaps you could simply introduce the evening's purpose, Isabella. A few sentences, very straightforward. Isabella's heart sank. All her weeks of preparation, all the time she had spent crafting words that she hoped would inspire people to help homeless children, reduced to a simple introduction. She looked at her father, hoping to see disagreement in his expression, but he seemed to be considering Victoria's suggestion seriously. That might actually reduce some of the pressure, he mused. Isabella, what do you think? What did she think? She thought that she wanted to prove herself capable of more than just a simple introduction. She thought that the homeless children deserved someone who would speak passionately about their needs, not just announce the evening's agenda. She thought that her mother, if she were still alive, would have encouraged her to take on the challenge rather than step back from it. But looking at the two adults watching her expectantly, Isabella realized that her opinion might matter less than she had hoped. Whatever you think is best, she said finally, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Victoria nodded approvingly. Wisdom often lies in knowing one's limitations and acting accordingly. You'll thank me for this guidance when you're older. As breakfast continued with polite conversation about the day's schedule and upcoming royal engagements, Isabella remained quiet, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask and doubts she didn't know how to voice. Later that afternoon, Princess Isabella sat in her favorite reading nook by the library's tall windows, staring out at the palace gardens without really seeing them. The leather-bound book of fairy tales lay unopened in her lap, her thoughts too tangled to focus on magical kingdoms and happy endings. The morning's conversation with Victoria kept replaying in her mind, each word carving deeper into her confidence. Miss Adelaide found her there an hour later, curled up like a small bird with ruffled feathers. Your Highness, you missed our afternoon lesson, the elderly governess said gently, settling into the chair across from Isabella. Miss Adelaide had been teaching royal children for over 30 years, and she had a gift for reading the emotions that young faces tried so hard to hide. I'm sorry, Miss Adelaide, Isabella murmured, finally looking up from the window. I was thinking. Heavy thoughts for such a young mind, Miss Adelaide observed, her kind eyes studying Isabella's troubled expression. Would you like to share what's weighing on your heart? Isabella hesitated. She had been taught never to speak negatively about family members, especially not Queen Regent Victoria, who held such an important position in the kingdom. But Miss Adelaide had always been someone she could trust with her worries. Do you think I'm ready for the charity gala? Isabella asked finally. Miss Adelaide tilted her head thoughtfully. What makes you question your readiness? Victoria thinks I should just do a simple introduction instead of my speech. She says the real speech is too difficult for someone my age. Isabella's voice grew smaller. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not smart enough or brave enough for something so important. Ah, Miss Adelaide said, understanding flooding her expression. And what do you believe, Princess Isabella? When you imagine yourself on that stage speaking about something you care deeply about, what do you see? Isabella closed her eyes, trying to picture the moment. I see myself helping people understand why the homeless children need our help. I see myself making them care as much as I do. She opened her eyes. But then I imagine forgetting my words or saying something wrong, and everyone thinking I'm just a silly little girl playing dress-up. Miss Adelaide leaned forward. May I tell you something about your mother? Isabella's attention sharpened immediately. Stories about her mother were precious and rare, carefully guarded treasures that the adults in her life shared sparingly. Queen Helena was about your age when she gave her first public speech, Miss Adelaide began. It was at a ceremony dedicating a new wing of the Children's Hospital. She had prepared for weeks just like you have, but the night before the event she came to her governess, my predecessor, in tears, convinced she would embarrass herself and her family. What happened? Isabella asked, leaning forward eagerly. Her governess told her something that I'm going to tell you now, Miss Adelaide said, her voice warm with memory. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Your Highness. Courage is feeling that fear and choosing to do what's right anyway. Your mother stood on that stage the next day, and yes, she stumbled over a few words, but her passion for helping others shone through every sentence, and by the end of her speech there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Isabella felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Really? Really? And do you know what she told me years later? She said that speech taught her that perfection wasn't what people needed from their princess. They needed authenticity, compassion, and someone who cared enough to try, even when it was scary. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting golden light across the library's ancient books and comfortable chairs. Isabella felt something shifting inside her, a small but growing determination that pushed back against the morning's doubts. "Miss Adelaide, do you think I could practice my speech one more time? The real one, not just an introduction?" Miss Adelaide smiled, the kind of smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "I think that would be an excellent idea. But first, I want you to remember something important. You're not giving this speech to impress Queen Regent Victoria, or to prove anything to the adults who doubt you. You're giving it because you have something important to say about children who need help." Isabella nodded, feeling more certain with each word. The homeless children deserve someone who will really speak for them, not just mention them quickly. "Exactly. And sometimes, Your Highness, doing what's right means disappointing people who want us to play it safe." They spent the next 2 hours in the library, with Isabella practicing her speech, while Miss Adelaide offered gentle corrections and encouragement. With each repetition, Isabella's voice grew stronger, more confident. She began to remember why she had wanted to give this speech in the first place, not for glory or recognition, but because she genuinely believed she could make a difference. As the sun began to set, painting the library in shades of amber and gold, Isabella felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. She would give her full speech at the charity gala, regardless of what Victoria preferred. But first, she would need to find the courage to tell her father about her choice, and hope that he would understand why this mattered so much to her. The conversation she was planning would either strengthen her resolve or shatter it completely, but Isabella knew she couldn't move forward without her father's support. Miss Adelaide watched her young charge gathering her courage and felt a familiar pride. She had seen the same determination in Queen Helena all those years ago, and she recognized it now in Isabella's straightening shoulders and lifted chin. Some battles were worth fighting, especially when they were fought for the right reasons. That evening, Princess Isabella paced nervously outside her father's study, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Through the heavy wooden door, she could hear the low murmur of his voice as he conducted his nightly call with the Prime Minister. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 o'clock, its deep tones echoing through the corridor and marking another minute of her anxious waiting. When the study door finally opened, Prince Alexander emerged, looking tired but pleased to see his daughter. His formal jacket was gone, replaced by a comfortable sweater, and his usually perfect hair was slightly mussed from running his hands through it during long conversations about state affairs. "Isabella, what a lovely surprise," he said, his face brightening. "I was just thinking about you." "How was your afternoon with Miss Adelaide?" "It was good, Papa," Isabella replied, using the informal title she was allowed in private moments. "Could we talk? I have something important to tell you." Prince Alexander studied his daughter's serious expression and gestured for her to come into his study. The room was Isabella's favorite in the entire palace, warm and inviting with its leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the crackling fireplace that made everything feel cozy, despite the formal portraits of long-dead kings watching from the walls. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" he asked, settling into his favorite armchair and patting his knee, inviting Isabella to sit beside him as she had done since she was tiny. Isabella climbed up beside her father, drawing comfort from his familiar warmth and the scent of his cologne. But instead of curling up against him as she usually did, she sat straight, looking directly into his eyes with an expression that reminded him startlingly of her mother. "I want to give my full speech at the charity gala," she said without preamble. "Not just an introduction. The whole speech I've been practicing." Prince Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "Isabella, we discussed this at breakfast. Queen Regent Victoria thinks it might be better if you started with something simpler." "I know what Victoria thinks," Isabella replied, and her father noticed she had dropped the formal title. "But I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I disagree." The boldness of her statement hung in the air between them. Prince Alexander had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. The day when his daughter would begin to assert her own opinions about her royal duties. He had hoped it might happen when she was older, when the stakes felt less overwhelming. "Tell me why," he said simply. Isabella took a deep breath, calling upon all the courage Miss Adelaide had helped her find. The speech isn't about me proving I'm smart or brave. It's about helping children who don't have homes find families who will love them. When I practice my speech, I think about those children. And I know I can help people understand why they matter. Prince Alexander listened carefully, hearing echoes of his late wife's passionate advocacy in their daughter's words. But sweetheart, what if you make mistakes? What if the pressure is too much? Then I'll make mistakes, Isabella said with a small shrug. Miss Adelaide told me that Mama stumbled over words in her first speech too, but people still cared about what she had to say because she meant it. The mention of Queen Helena created a moment of silence. Prince Alexander felt the familiar ache of loss mixed with fierce pride in the remarkable young woman his daughter was becoming. Isabella, I need you to understand something, he said gently. Queen Regent Victoria isn't trying to hold you back because she doesn't believe in you. She's trying to protect you and protect the monarchy from potential criticism. I know, Isabella replied. But Papa, if I only do things that are completely safe, how will I ever learn to do hard things? How will I ever become the kind of queen who can really help people? The question struck Prince Alexander like a lightning bolt. In trying to shield his daughter from failure and criticism, was he actually preventing her from developing the very qualities she would need as a future monarch? Victoria is going to be very unhappy if I support your decision, he warned. Isabella's resolve wavered slightly, but she pressed on. Are you more worried about Victoria being unhappy or about me failing? The question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of every parenting dilemma Prince Alexander had faced since becoming a widower. How much should he protect Isabella, and how much should he trust her to find her own way? I'm worried about both, he admitted honestly. But you're right that you need to learn to face challenges. The question is whether this particular challenge is the right place to start. Isabella slipped down from the chair and stood in front of her father, her small hands clasped behind her back in unconscious imitation of formal royal posture. Papa, you always tell me that being royal means serving others, not just having pretty clothes and fancy parties. This speech is my chance to really serve someone, the homeless children who need families. If I don't try to give the best speech I can, then I'm not really serving them, am I? Prince Alexander stared at his daughter, amazed by her wisdom and slightly overwhelmed by her determination. She was right, of course. Service did require risk, and leadership meant stepping forward even when the outcome was uncertain. What if we compromise? He suggested. You give your full speech, but we arrange for extra practice sessions with public speaking coaches. And we'll have Miss Adelaide in the front row, ready to help if you need support. Isabella's face lit up with joy and relief. Really? You'll let me try? I'll let you try, Prince Alexander confirmed. But Isabella, this means Queen Regent Victoria and I will need to have a very serious conversation. She's not going to be pleased with this decision. Isabella's expression grew solemn. Will she be very angry with me? Prince Alexander pulled his daughter close, wrapping his arms around her in a protective hug. Let me worry about Victoria. Your job is to prepare the best speech you can and remember why you're giving it. As they sat together in the warm glow of the fireplace, both father and daughter understood that they had just crossed an important threshold. Isabella was beginning to claim her voice as a future queen, and Prince Alexander was learning to trust her instincts even when they challenged the safer path. Neither of them anticipated just how explosive Victoria's reaction would be when she learned of their decision. The next morning arrived with an unseasonably fierce storm, as if nature itself was preparing for the tempest about to unfold within the palace walls. Prince Alexander had requested a private meeting with Queen Regent Victoria in her formal office, a room that always made him feel like he was attending a tribunal rather than a family discussion. Victoria sat behind her imposing mahogany desk, surrounded by the portraits of stern-faced monarchs and the gleaming symbols of royal authority that she had carefully arranged to remind visitors of the weight of tradition and protocol. She was already reviewing correspondence when Prince Alexander entered, and she didn't look up immediately, a subtle power play that wasn't lost on him. You wanted to discuss Isabella's role in the charity gala, she said without preamble, her pen continuing to move across official documents. I trust you've had time to consider the wisdom of scaling back her participation. Prince Alexander remained standing, choosing not to take the seat across from her desk. Actually, Victoria, I've decided to support Isabella's desire to give her full speech. The pen stopped moving. Victoria's head lifted slowly, her gray eyes focusing on him with laser-like intensity. I beg your pardon? Isabella has been working on this speech for weeks, She's passionate about the cause, and she deserves the chance to prove herself capable of rising to the occasion. Victoria set down her pen with deliberate precision and leaned back in her chair. Alexander, we discussed this yesterday. The child is not ready for such exposure. The risks far outweigh any potential benefits. I disagree, Prince Alexander replied calmly, though he could feel tension building in his shoulders. Isabella needs opportunities to grow into her role, not constant protection from every possible challenge. Growth is important, Victoria conceded, her voice taking on the sharp edge the palace staff had learned to recognize as a warning. But growth should be measured and controlled, not reckless and premature. Do you have any idea what kind of scrutiny this event will bring? Do you understand the potential damage if she fails publicly? Prince Alexander moved closer to the desk, his own voice gaining strength. And do you understand the damage we're doing by constantly telling a 9-year-old that she's not capable of meeting expectations? Isabella has more natural charisma and genuine compassion than most adults I know. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back with enough force to hit the wall behind her. Charisma and compassion are lovely qualities for a private citizen, but they are not enough for a future monarch. The crown requires discipline, flawless execution, and absolute control over one's public image. The crown requires authenticity and connection with the people, Prince Alexander countered. Isabella has both of those qualities in abundance. What she needs is confidence and experience, not more reasons to doubt herself. What she needs, Victoria said, her voice rising for the first time, is proper guidance from adults who understand the complexities of statecraft better than a sentimental 9-year-old. The word sentimental hung in the air like an accusation, and Prince Alexander felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Sentimental? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that what you call Isabella's genuine desire to help homeless children find families? Victoria walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. I call it naive idealism that could embarrass this family if not properly managed. Alexander, I have been protecting this monarchy since before Isabella was born. I have guided this kingdom through political scandals, economic crises, and public relations disasters that would have toppled lesser institutions. And I'm grateful for your service, Prince Alexander replied. But Isabella is my daughter, and decisions about her public role ultimately rest with me. Your daughter, Victoria repeated, her eyes flashing with something that looked almost like fury, is third in line to the throne of this kingdom. Her actions reflect on all of us, and her failures become our failures. I will not stand by and watch decades of careful reputation management destroyed by one child's stubborn refusal to acknowledge her limitations. Prince Alexander took a step back, genuinely shocked by the venom in Victoria's voice. In all their years of working together, even during their most heated policy disagreements, he had never seen her lose control so completely. Victoria, you're talking about a charity speech to support homeless children, not a declaration of war. Even if Isabella makes mistakes, the cause itself is so worthy that people will forgive any imperfections in the delivery. You are incredibly naive if you believe that, Victoria snapped. The media will dissect every stumbled word, every nervous gesture, every moment of uncertainty. They will use any weakness they perceive to question Isabella's fitness for future responsibilities, and by extension our entire family's competence. Then maybe, Prince Alexander said, his voice gaining a steel edge that rarely appeared, our family's competence shouldn't be measured by the flawless performance of a 9-year-old child. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed with anger. How dare you question my judgment? I have sacrificed everything for this kingdom, devoted my entire adult life to preserving the dignity and strength of this monarchy. I will not allow your sentimentality about your daughter to undo everything I have built. My sentimentality? Prince Alexander repeated, his own temper finally breaking free. Victoria, we're talking about supporting a child who wants to use her position to help others. If that's sentimentality, then perhaps this monarchy needs more of it, not less. The office fell silent except for the sound of rain lashing against the tall windows. Both adults stood facing each other across a divide that suddenly felt much wider than the few feet of Persian carpet between them. Victoria composed herself with visible effort, straightening her jacket and smoothing her hair. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled but arctic. Very well, Alexander. Allow Isabella to give her speech. But understand this. When she falters, when the criticism comes, when the damage to our reputation becomes clear, The responsibility will be entirely yours. I wash my hands of this decision and its consequences. Prince Alexander nodded stiffly. I accept that responsibility. As he turned to leave Victoria's office, neither of them noticed the small figure that had been standing just outside the partially open door, listening to every word of their heated exchange with growing dismay and determination. Princess Isabella pressed herself against the corridor wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the palace could hear it. The angry voices from Victoria's office had drawn her like a magnet, and now she wished she had never come looking for her father. The words she had heard, about failures and damage and reputation, swirled in her mind like a tornado of doubt and fear. When her father emerged from the office, his face was grim and his usually perfect posture was rigid with barely controlled anger. Isabella tried to slip away unnoticed, but Prince Alexander's sharp eyes caught the flash of her blue dress disappearing around the corner. "Isabella," he called softly. "Come here, sweetheart." She emerged from her hiding spot, her cheeks burning with embarrassment at being caught eavesdropping. But instead of the scolding she expected, her father's expression immediately softened with concern. "How much did you hear?" he asked gently, kneeling down to her eye level. "Enough," Isabella whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "Papa, maybe Victoria is right. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I should just do the introduction and not risk embarrassing everyone." Prince Alexander felt his heart break a little as he watched his brave daughter's confidence crumble. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid. Isabella doubting herself because of adult conflicts she shouldn't have to navigate. "Isabella, look at me," he said firmly. "Do you want to give that speech because you believe in helping those children?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Do you think your words might inspire people to donate money or volunteer time to help homeless children find families?" "I hope so," Isabella said, her voice growing slightly stronger. "Then that's all that matters," Prince Alexander declared. "Victoria is worried about protecting the monarchy's image, and I understand her concerns. But sometimes, sweetheart, doing the right thing requires taking risks." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that was decidedly unprincess-like, but completely authentic. "What if I mess up? What if I forget my words or say something wrong? Then you'll be human," her father replied with a small smile. "And people will see that their future queen is someone who cares enough to try, even when it's scary." They walked together to the palace gardens, where the storm had passed and left everything clean and bright. The roses were heavy with raindrops and the air smelled fresh and full of possibilities. Isabella found her favorite bench beneath the old oak tree, where her mother used to read her stories, and father and daughter sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Papa," Isabella said eventually, "Miss Adelaide told me that Mama was nervous before her first speech too." "Your mother was nervous before every speech," Prince Alexander admitted with a fond chuckle. "She used to practice in front of her mirror for hours, making faces at herself when she stumbled over difficult words." "Really?" Isabella giggled, trying to imagine her elegant mother making silly faces. "Really. But you know what she told me once? She said that her nervousness proved how much she cared about doing well. Only people who don't care about the outcome can be completely calm." Isabella considered this wisdom, feeling it settle into her mind like a puzzle piece finding its proper place. Her nervousness wasn't a weakness, it was proof that this speech mattered to her. Over the next week, Isabella threw herself into preparation with renewed determination. Miss Adelaide arranged for additional practice sessions, and even some of the palace staff volunteered to serve as practice audiences. The head gardener, the chief cook, and two of the housekeepers gathered in the library each afternoon to listen to Isabella's speech and offer encouragement. To everyone's surprise, Isabella seemed to gain confidence with each practice session. Her voice grew stronger, her gestures more natural, and her passion for the cause shone through every word. Even the usually reserved head butler was moved to tears during one rehearsal when Isabella spoke about children, sleeping in cold alleyways while dreaming of warm beds and loving families, but Victoria maintained her frosty disapproval, speaking to Isabella only when absolutely necessary, and making her displeasure clear through pointed silences and cool looks. The tension in the palace was palpable, with staff members walking on eggshells and everyone anticipating the approaching charity gala with a mixture of excitement and dread. 3 days before the event, Isabella was practicing her speech in the mirror of her bedroom when she heard a soft knock on her door. She expected to see Miss Adelaide or perhaps one of the maids, but to her surprise, Victoria entered the room. The Queen Regent looked around Isabella's cheerful bedroom, so different from the formal spaces where they usually interacted, taking in the stuffed animals, the drawing stuck to the mirror, and the general organized chaos of childhood. "May I sit down?" Victoria asked, gesturing to the window seat where Isabella often curled up to read. Isabella nodded, suddenly nervous about this unexpected private visit. Victoria had never come to her bedroom before, and the informal setting made everything feel strange and uncertain. "Isabella," Victoria began, her voice softer than usual. "I owe you an explanation." The young princess blinked in surprise. Adults in her world rarely explained their decisions to children, especially not adults as important as Queen Regent Victoria. "When I was your age," Victoria continued, "I made a very public mistake during a royal ceremony. I was supposed to lay a wreath at a memorial service, and I tripped on the steps in front of hundreds of people and thousands watching on television. The newspapers were merciless. They called me clumsy, ungraceful, unfit for royal duties." Isabella had never heard this story before, and she couldn't imagine the always perfect Victoria stumbling in public. "It taught me that the world judges royal children very harshly," Victoria said. "Every mistake becomes a headline. Every imperfection becomes a character flaw. I have spent my entire adult life trying to protect this family from that kind of scrutiny." "But did the criticism stop you from doing important things?" Isabella asked quietly. Victoria paused, clearly not expecting the question. "It made me more careful," she said finally. "More careful or more scared?" Isabella pressed gently. The question hung in the air between them, and Isabella could see Victoria struggling with memories and emotions she rarely allowed herself to examine. The night of the charity gala arrived with clear skies and a sense of anticipation that seemed to electrify the entire palace. Princess Isabella stood in front of her bedroom mirror, wearing a midnight blue dress that brought out her eyes and made her feel both grown-up and authentically herself. Miss Adelaide was putting the finishing touches on her hair, weaving small pearls through her curls that caught the light like captured stars. "Remember, Your Highness," Miss Adelaide said softly, "speak from your heart. The words will follow." Isabella nodded, her reflection showing a young girl who looked nervous but determined. The past week had been a whirlwind of final preparations, last-minute rehearsals, and an unexpected conversation with Victoria that had shifted something fundamental in their relationship. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts, and Prince Alexander entered, looking handsome in his formal evening wear, but carrying the same nervous energy that Isabella felt thrumming through her own body. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked, offering his arm in the formal gesture they had practiced. "Ready, Papa?" Isabella replied, slipping her small hand into the crook of his elbow. The ballroom of Westmont Palace had been transformed into a glittering wonderland of lights and flowers, with round tables draped in cream cloth and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. Nearly 500 guests filled the space. Diplomats in elegant gowns and tailored tuxedos, members of parliament with their families, journalists with their cameras, and most importantly, representatives from children's charities across the kingdom. As Isabella and her father made their entrance, conversations quieted and all eyes turned toward them. Isabella felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but underneath it was something new, a solid core of purpose that steadied her steps and lifted her chin. Victoria was already seated at the head table, resplendent in emerald green silk, her expression carefully neutral. But when Isabella caught her eye, Victoria offered a small nod that somehow conveyed both encouragement and apology. The dinner portion of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and careful etiquette. Isabella barely tasted her food, her mind focused on the speech she would soon deliver. She had practiced it so many times that the words felt like old friends, but she knew that speaking to her mirror was very different from addressing hundreds of expectant faces. Finally, the moment arrived. The master of ceremonies approached the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is my honor to present Her Royal Highness Princess Isabella, who will address us tonight about the vital work of finding permanent families for our kingdom's homeless children." Applause filled the room as Isabella rose from her seat, Her heart pounding, but her steps steady. The walk to the podium felt both endless and instantaneous. And suddenly she was standing behind the microphone, looking out at a sea of faces that ranged from encouraging to skeptical, to openly curious about what this young princess might have to say. Isabella adjusted the microphone to her height, took a deep breath and began. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to support children who are waiting for something that most of us take for granted, a family to call their own. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily to the back of the room. In the audience, Prince Alexander felt his chest swell with pride, while Victoria found herself leaning forward slightly, genuinely interested in what Isabella would say next. I've been learning about homeless children in our kingdom, Isabella continued, and I discovered something that surprised me. These children aren't homeless because there aren't enough houses. They're homeless because they don't have families who love them enough to make those houses into homes. The ballroom had grown completely quiet, the kind of attention that speakers dream of commanding. Isabella could see people setting down their water glasses and focusing entirely on her words. I met a little girl named Emma last month when I visited the children's shelter, Isabella said, her voice growing more confident with each sentence. Emma is 7 years old, and she told me that her biggest wish isn't for toys or games or even her own room. Her biggest wish is for someone to tuck her in at night and call her sweetheart. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, clearly moved by the simple honesty of the statement. There are hundreds of children like Emma in our kingdom, Isabella continued, children who have so much love to give, if only someone would give them the chance. Tonight we have the opportunity to change that. The money you donate and the awareness you spread can help connect children with families who are ready to love them. Isabella paused, remembering Miss Adelaide's advice about letting important moments breathe. In that silence, she could feel the room's energy shifting, the formal politeness transforming into genuine engagement. Some people might think I'm too young to understand what family really means, Isabella said, her eyes finding her father's face in the crowd. But I know what it feels like to lose a parent, and I know how grateful I am for the family I still have. Every child deserves to feel that gratitude, that security, that love. The princess's voice grew stronger as she approached her conclusion. When you leave here tonight, I hope you'll remember Emma and the hundreds of children like her. I hope you'll remember that creating a family isn't just about sharing DNA, it's about sharing your heart. And I hope you'll help us give these children the one thing they want most in the world, a place where they belong. Isabella stepped back from the podium to a moment of complete silence, and for a terrifying instant, she wondered if she had failed completely. But then the applause began, starting slowly and building into something that felt like a celebration. People weren't just clapping politely, they were rising to their feet, their faces showing genuine emotion and enthusiasm. As Isabella made her way back to her table, she could see tears in many eyes, and she overheard fragments of conversations about adoption procedures and volunteer opportunities. More importantly, she could see the representatives from the children's charities looking hopeful and energized in a way that suggested her words had accomplished exactly what she had hoped. Prince Alexander swept her into a hug the moment she reached their table, whispering, "I'm so proud of you," against her ear. But the moment that surprised Isabella most came when Victoria approached. Her usually perfect composure cracked just enough to reveal genuine admiration. "That was exceptional, Isabella," Victoria said quietly. "You reminded all of us why we do this work in the first place." Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests began to leave, Isabella learned that the event had raised more money than any previous charity gala in the palace's history. More importantly, dozens of families had approached the charity representatives to inquire about adoption and fostering procedures. Standing in her bedroom hours later, still in her midnight blue dress but with her feet finally freed from her formal shoes, Isabella realized that something fundamental had changed. She had found her voice as a princess not by being perfect or following every rule, but by speaking authentically about something that mattered to her. The scared little girl who had overheard that conversation between her father and Victoria was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood that true royal duty meant using her position to serve others, even when it felt risky or uncertain. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Princess Isabella dreamed not of crowns or ceremonies, but of children like Emma finding their way home to families who would love them exactly as they were. And in that dream, she knew she had discovered the kind of queen she wanted to become. Not perfect, but passionate. Not flawless, but fearless in her commitment to making the world a little bit better for those who needed it most.